Welcome to Intersect, a podcast where we find connection in each other's story. My name is Jim Moon, your host, and today I am with Miles and Samantha Kim. I met Miles through his dad, Phil. We were buddies. We started walking on a trail here in Ottawa during COVID, and then found out about this incredibly intelligent son that he had that was in engineering school at Walla Walla University, and that he had a girlfriend at the time that was also studying engineering. So they're here to tell us about their story and a little bit of shift in their current experience. Maybe you might call it a calling, from engineering to
ministry. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So Miles, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Samantha about yourself, just briefly, a little bit of introduction of your background, whatever you think we'd like to know, and then we'll dive into that shift.
Yeah. So I'm Miles Kim. I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering, and I'm finishing up my master's at the end of the semester.
Okay.
And I've always enjoyed studying my Bible,
Mm-hmm.
and digging in deeper and learning more about God all the time.
All right. And you're working on your master's where are you finishing that up?
I'm finishing that up University of Rochester in upstate New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where there's snow and the Buffalo Bills and you name it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Okay.
I spend most of the time indoors studying, but those things do exist around there.
All right. That's cool. And then Samantha?
Yeah, so I'm Samantha Kim.
Mm-hmm.
I'm originally from Southern California in Riverside, and I met Miles in high school, and then we both went to Walla Walla, where I also got a bachelor's in mechanical engineering.
Okay.
I'm currently working at the Laboratory for Laser Energetics that's affiliated with University of Rochester,
Okay.
but as you said earlier, that will be changing.
Okay. So now, just out of curiosity, and you can say I declined, but maiden name?
Griggs.
Griggs. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a Griggs University that's like an online school.
Yeah, if there's affiliation, we don't know about it.
Okay. So, all right. So, just interestingly enough, I think this shift might be a little more intriguing if we get a little bit of your journey, maybe toward one another into engineering, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're collectively as a couple feeling like this communal call. So maybe, I don't know where you want to start with the backstory, but, a little bit of how you met, a little bit of how you were drawn to engineering, and then wham, shift, like like you're going one direction, now the other direction.
Yeah, I mean, we met at Rio Lindo Adventist Academy.
Mm-hmm.
We met their sophomore year. I came to Rio after begging my dad to let me go there for a couple years, and he had me try public school for a year, and it took a year of that before he was finally able to relent and let me go there.
Okay.
Sam, how'd you end up there?
Yeah, I ended up at Rio Lindo Adventist Academy because I was kind of looking for a school where I could get to know God better.
Interesting. So had you not gone to an Adventist school before that, or?
I was at La Sierra Academy.
Okay.
But it wasn't kind of the environment that I needed to really grow spiritually for myself. And so my sophomore year, the summer before, my family took a vacation up to Northern California, where my dad was also kind of working with the business office at Rio.
Mm-hmm.
And we took a tour of the school.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, I kind of really felt like, God said, like, hey, this is where you need to go if we're going to build this relationship. And so, 2 weeks before school started, I signed up and was there.
Okay. So here you are. Here Sam is.
Mm-hmm.
He had to kind of strong arm his dad through the power of teenage persuasion.
Yeah.
You were looking for, something that kind of more aligned with your spiritual values and quest.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're both there, so somehow you met there. I don't know how that happened, but
Yeah, we met for the first time in Algebra 2 class, Advanced Algebra 2 class.
Oh, go figure.
Yeah, both sitting in the front row, said hi to each other. But then we became friends, and that was a little bit of an interesting story. I think Sam can start that story.
Yeah, I think it kind of started out where I kind of started liking him, but he did not reciprocate.
Oh, was he oblivious?
I think he was oblivious, except for that he was told by one of my friend's friends.
Somebody tipped him off.
Yeah.
A woodshop class.
Oh, okay.
But I was really impressed because, usually that's, if you don't like somebody back, you just kind of stay away from them. But he actually wanted to get to know me better, and that's how we became really good friends and eventually did, even other activities like planning Bible studies and mentoring and stuff together. So it built a really good friendship.
So you kind of just kept an open posture to, okay, I know this person's interested, but I'm not going to feel threatened by it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were good friends. We became good friends after that, and we didn't really consider being together romantically for a good while. We didn't start dating until college. But we both had a love for God, and that really was the foundation of our friendship. And so as we grew as Christians, we were seeking ways that we could do ministry around us. So we were going on mission trips, starting Bible studies, things like that at the academy. And then when we got to college, we were doing things like we got involved in a children's ministry called His Kids in Action at Walla Walla University.
Okay.
Sort of like a VBS thing every Saturday.
Yeah.
And then we also went on a year-long mission trip as student missionaries to the islands. We were going to go to the same island. We ended up going to different islands because student missionaries are not allowed to date each other.
Oh, yeah. Cause you might get focused on a different mission.
Yeah. I think that's their concern. Okay. So we were respectful of that. We didn't try to sneak it or anything. We just decided to go to different islands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even during that time, though, it was a big blessing, I think, because even though we were apart, we grew in a way that when we came back after that year of distance, we were still really compatible. And even in the skills that we developed, they matched well, I think.
We became more complementary even than we were before.
That's interesting. What do you think contributed to that? Just that you had to communicate more because you weren't there in person, or?
Well, I think it's difficult when you spend a year in another culture and you come back to your own culture. You're both experiencing reverse culture shock a little bit. And it would have been hard to communicate or understand each other's experience if we hadn't both been in those shoes. We weren't in the same place, so we had different experiences, but we were both student missionaries, and so our experiences had a lot of things in common that they didn't with a lot of our peers. When we returned, a lot of the friends we had before, we just couldn't relate or connect with them anymore.
So you had culture shock empathy.
Yeah, I suppose. Good way to put it. And so ever since we got back, we really wanted to give more of our lives to God. We had enjoyed spending a year full time serving Him directly. Okay. And so we were both interested in changing our careers in such a way that we could serve God more directly in our careers. Okay. But we were both counseled by our mentors, people we respected, that we shouldn't switch careers from engineering if we had skill and talent in engineering, that we could be ministers as lay people. Okay. And that the church still needs engineers. So we didn't want to go do something different anyway, unless God had called us to, because we did have this bright future in engineering. And so we didn't end up pursuing ministry at that time, and instead ended up putting all our effort and attention towards getting that degree in engineering. Okay. And building careers in that.
All right. So you got some direction of like, hey, you're kind of feeling drawn to ministry because of your missions experience, but you got voices that are saying, well, actually, you can do ministry in engineering, which is probably true. I mean, I think we're all called to, say, make disciples.
Exactly.
But how we do that or how we engage in that varies. So you're being told, well, you can make disciples or you can do ministry as an engineer. So they're like, okay, well, we'll stick with that.
Mm-hmm. And we got involved with a Sabbath school called Renew Sabbath School, a small group based Bible study. Every Saturday we became leaders in that group. And like we said before, we got involved in some children's ministry. We still wanted to do ministry wherever we're at.
Mm-hmm. As you guys are involved in ministry, how would you describe, Sam, say the texture of your involvement, what you were experiencing? How would you describe what you were experiencing if you were to, like, I'm intrigued to know what might the similarities be, what are the differences? Maybe you start, Sam.
You mean like different from Miles's experience, or like,
or just what are you experiencing? You say we got involved in ministry.
Oh,
so what's your experience? You're back, or you might even share a little bit about your student missions, and then how your experience in ministry, getting back on campus.
Yeah. I think something that really became apparent during that time was, I think, like leadership ability. When you're a teacher, it really takes a lot of effort to keep the kids on track. And in a way that's, not just yelling at them.
Yeah, that's kind of the bottom of the totem pole motivational.
And so I think that built a lot of confidence in being able to work with people of different age groups, but also just conveying content. And so coming back, leading stuff like small group Bible studies was a lot more viable. And we also kind of noticed from our teaching experience that being a leader, even in a Bible study situation, isn't about teaching what you've learned from the Bible. It's about how do we get a conversation started?
Oh, okay.
And like, it's about mediating, making sure that different people in the room have the ability to speak, even if they're maybe a little bit shy too. And so that, I think, was something that I really kind of learned and tried to implement when doing that kind of stuff. And I think that also kind of played out in his Kids in Action, just trying to get kids involved with each other and with us, and just kind of work together as a whole.
So as you've had these experiences as a student missionary teaching, you come back, you're beginning to realize from a leadership perspective that it's not just the dissemination of content, it's about how in that small group Bible study setting, that Sabbath school setting, how you create space for ownership and agency for those that are participating to kind of find themselves drawn into, vested in.
Make it practical for their lives.
Yeah. And where they're kind of like owning their learning experience. So you're facilitating that in a way.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the most difficult part of leading small group Bible study, it's not having things to say, because I feel like Sam was saying, the leader of a small group Bible study probably should be the person who speaks the least.
Okay.
The most difficult thing is either you have a room full of people who don't want to talk, or you have a couple people who won't stop talking, right? So it's like, I felt like the key there was finding ways to average out the talking so that everybody had a chance to share. Because everyone has something to say, but they don't always have the confidence to say it unless there's a good, thick chunk of awkward silence.
So how do you be strategic with both your facilitation of the group and your wisdom of what you share and when you share it?
Well, I know that I tend to be more of a talker, so I have to curb myself as well. But I think something important to do is when somebody's talking a lot, it's important to engage them and hear what they have to say, and then bounce off of them maybe with a question to everybody else.
So like redirect a little bit.
Yeah. But there's a degree to if somebody's determined to talk, you're probably going to have to talk to them afterwards.
So there's a little bit of learning some conflict resolution skills.
And that's not easy.
How to be assertive without being, what assertive starts with.
Yeah, especially because oftentimes when you end up leading a Bible study, you you aren't recognized as the leader because you are speaking the least and you're just
Okay.
directing things. So then how do you also assert some authority in order to keep the conversation going well?
Yeah.
It's not, I think that's an ever growing skill. I don't think anyone has a perfect answer to that. It's situational.
Okay. As far as Samantha kind of started this conversation around what maybe some of the experience that she was gleaning. Was there anything you wanted to add from your perspective of stepping in, starting to experience leadership, starting to, obviously you're catching your wings, so to speak, in the student missions experience, but then coming back online, was there anything additional that you feel like was significant for you?
I think just having patience and tolerance for people. We're not all uniform. We don't all think similarly. And so for me, it can be easy for me to see an idea pop up that I'm not comfortable with in the discussion, and then want to sort of direct away from those ideas. And yet, as a leader, it's important that everybody gets to share what they're thinking and not to try and censor what's going on.
Why is that important?
Well, I think that it's easy, especially for us as Adventists. We have a lot of truth and we have a lot of reasons behind that truth. We have a firm undergirding of theology. But in order to agree with and really embrace that theology, somebody has to reach it for themselves. I know that at the beginning, when I was being presented all these things by my superiors, I would have a gut reaction of skepticism. Because a lot of the things that Adventists believe, it's straight from the Bible, but it's not straight from one or two clear verses in the Bible, right? And so were somebody to try and tell me about the investigative judgment, you really have to go and study that for yourself.
Yeah.
And in a small group study, it's important that everyone's able to share where they're at, what they're thinking, that nobody feels like they're trying to be forced into a mold, and instead they're discovering that truth for themselves. And so even if there's some opinions that you don't quite agree with, it's important to allow those to flow and allow discussions to form around them.
I had an interesting experience last night. So we're with this family, and they asked us to come over to the restaurant here at Four Corners in Ottawa called Haisu. It's HIGHSU. I jokingly said, I keep looking for Sue to say hi, and it's Chinese, but anyways, sorry for the bad joke. But anyways, we're having supper together, and it's this older couple. They're like in their 60s. They have grandchildren, and somehow the conversation comes up around like the supernatural, ghosts, and
is this a believing couple or?
Yeah, they're both Christian. One of them, the wife has an Adventist background. The husband is Baptist background. It's a crazy story. They moved into this house where, just a little bit graphic, but the former owners, the wife was going to leave and move to a different state to live with her kids. The guy murders her and then writes a note and shoots himself.
Oh my gosh.
And they're moving into this house. And so the husband of this couple I'm talking to last night, he's telling me this story, and he says, and so like when I moved, when we finally got occupancy and we moved in, he's like, I first walk in and I feel like prickly hair on my shoulders and my spine, and I was just like, Fred, you're not allowed here or something. Like he was like referring to the former owner, and I'm like, he's like, do you believe in ghosts? And I'm like, well, I said, my perspective from biblically speaking is that, when we die, we don't go to heaven or hell. We just like rest in the grave, and then there's a resurrection of the righteous and a resurrection of the wicked, blah, blah, blah. Kind of just quickly summarized. And he's like, okay, I know. But, I just want to say, like after my mother died, he's like, I heard her voice and nobody's going to tell me I didn't hear her voice. And I was like, okay. And I was reflecting on it when we were driving home. I was talking about with my wife and daughter, and I was like, think sometimes when people bring up something and they're like, what do you think about? They're not fully really interested in what you think as much as they probably want you to flip it and say, well, you know what?
What do you think?
Yeah. And it was just kind of interesting to me. Like, so when you talked about this thing of like holding space for people to kind of feel safe enough to question, that's an interesting kind of thing. Like, you know, how do we help them find their way towards what we believe to be truth, but do it in such a way that our dissemination of truth doesn't become a turnoff.
Right. And it doesn't mean fostering wrong ideas, but it does mean allowing the conversation to flow and the ideas to flow so that that person never feels that they were cut off or boxed into a corner.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Okay. So, so you kind of learned some lessons about leadership. You go down. Tell us a little bit about this track that. Okay. So we're gonna like, you know, engineering's got to be our ministry. So you pursue that. You get to graduation. You start tracking a course, right? So tell us a little bit about that part of the journey.
Yeah, at least for me, up until this point, I was kind of in engineering because I knew a lot of people in engineering. It sounded kind of interesting. But I hadn't, grown up like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be an engineer, my whole life. And so when I was going kind of through engineering or even coming out of high school, I was praying, like, hey God, what do you want me to do? And through that whole time, I had never actually gotten an answer. And that was really difficult for me.
Okay.
Because, I had felt this clear path of like, you got to go to Rio. And I just kind of had this expectation that would be, same with the college I would go to or the career path that I would be choosing.
So you had a clear sense of go to your academy that you went to, Rio Lindo. But after that, when you're thinking about what am I going to do professionally, it felt a little bit mum.
Yeah. And so there was a good 5-6 years there where I was kind of in waiting, like, okay, God, graduation's getting closer. Am I, like the decision to hop out of engineering, if you don't want me to do this, like it's coming, what do you want me to do? And the closer and closer graduation got, I kind of felt that my faith was waning. And I just really was like, okay, I guess God's just not gonna help me out with this. And that was a really difficult thing. But afterwards, even having done an engineering job past this, and working even with Miles, it really kind of brought my faith back that it's like, God may not tell you everything that you like are expecting him to tell you. And that's okay. And that doesn't mean that he's not like guiding your life just because it's not what you're expecting him or thinking that he should be saying. So yeah, it was just kind of a weird dip there, but he kind of brought me back up, I guess.
Yeah.
There's this verse that Jesus says, I don't remember the exact reference. I believe it's in the book of John where he says to the disciples, I have many things to tell you, but you're not ready to hear them. And I think sometimes, in that I've traditionally thought of that as like theological things.
Right.
But what if in his wisdom and discernment, it's even just like life steps? It's like, well, you think you don't need to go through this, but in a way you kind of do, even though it may feel like a total waste.
Yeah. And I definitely think that happened because through this engineering degree, like I learned problem solving so much more, and like I can appreciate even nature to some extent more because I understand more of the mechanics. And going through this job, even though it's been kind of difficult, and that's a whole other story. It gave me more self-esteem, and more trust in God, and more of a realization of kind of how the world works, and that it's not necessarily what you expect.
So in some sense, you're 2 or 3 years in the field of engineering calibrated your sense of quote unquote the real world.
Yeah, definitely. We kind of both grew up in a Adventist hub. And so kind of stepping out of that, I think, was a big eye-opener for both of us.
When you step out of the hub of love, it's not always loving.
Yeah. But I think it was really good for us to learn.
Okay.
Yeah. And during this time, I actually really have enjoyed what I was doing. I ended up pursuing graduate school in engineering. I applied to a PhD program, got in, had a lot of fun with the work I was doing. But I was finding sort of a lack of larger scale fulfillment in what I was doing. So I feel like day to day, I'm just doing my hobby and it's fun. But I didn't feel like I was making a significant impact on others. And during the same time, I was spending time doing a deep dive into the sanctuary of the Old Testament, trying to understand the symbolism there. I came across a sermon series by a pastor in Arizona named Gary Vendon. Vendon's a big name in Adventism, but he was talking about how the daily sanctuary service was representative of the gospel. And so I started taking a deep dive into that and had some discoveries there about salvation by faith. I think everyone believes that we're justified by faith. I mean, not everybody, but Christians in general believe that we're forgiven by Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, which is sort of represented by the altar in the Old Testament sanctuary. But as I was studying the laver in the Old Testament, it's like the wash basin that's between the altar and the tabernacle. I was studying that and studying its connection to the New Testament and discovered sort of this doctrine of sanctification by faith, that we can't be like, I don't know, my whole life as an Adventist, I felt this, like you're forgiven, of course you're saved, but your sanctification, your transformation over time, that is sort of on you, and you should be trying hard to improve and get better, because don't you love Jesus? He did so much for you.
So it's like you're given a clean slate, but now you're going to have to draw out the picture of your own holiness.
Exactly, and you can just keep coming back to get that slate washed while you try and get the picture right. But no one's really teaching you how to draw, right?
Yeah.
And so discovered sort of this idea that to become righteous, to become holy, to improve, is to seek a relationship with Jesus and spend time with him all the time. He says, attach to me the true grapevine and you'll produce much fruit. A fig tree doesn't try really hard to bear fruit. It just bears fruit because it's a fig tree and is connected to the source of life. And so when we realized that, this was sort of a thing we discovered together, we started just seeking that relationship with Jesus, stopped trying so hard to improve in these areas that we were struggling with. And he started to change those things in us automatically. We weren't trying to change, but he started to change us way faster than any progress we had made up until that point in growth with him.
Okay, I just want to dig into that just a little more. Okay, so you figure out this thing that, like, so justification, this idea that by the grace of God, my past is forgiven. And then sanctification, by the grace of God, my life is being, transformed from glory to glory, so to speak, or however you want to describe that. Okay. So God is doing the work. He's done the work to forgive us, and he's doing the work to transform us.
Right.
Okay. So, and you're saying when we kind of quit trying, okay, so
And I wouldn't necessarily say quit trying.
Okay.
You just have to redirect your efforts, right? You're no longer directing your efforts toward your own transformation. You're directing your efforts toward a deeper understanding and relationship with Jesus.
Okay. So the focus becomes kind of relational. Like, what does it mean to talk with Jesus? What does it mean to, like, process life with Jesus?
Right.
Rather than, oh crap, did I have another Oreo this morning? Before lunch, and and I had milk too. And I mean, I don't know. Like,
yeah, exactly. I mean, small things like that, right? Where there's health things they're worried about. Maybe like, man, I really know I shouldn't be spending all my time or like using. I personally oftentimes found myself using media to escape from the things of life. For a long time, I knew there's nothing wrong with media or television. That's not what I'm trying to say. But for me personally, like I was using it to escape from what was happening.
Instagram medication.
Yeah. And I wasn't so much a social media person, but yes, a lot of Netflix, Marvel things. And that was something I had tried a long time to give up. And it wasn't just something, it was something I could give up for maybe a month or two, but it would always come back.
Okay.
And this, I guess, leads into the next chapter of our story, too. I felt that once we started to discover this message, we started to realize how uncommon I feel like that message really is to be shared, even in churches that we've been a part of.
So sanctification is less about what you're trying to stop and more about who you're seeking.
Right. And he sanctifies you. I think if you look at the parables relating to the wedding feast, there is one parable where the king sends out all of these garments to all his guests. That's not specifically recorded, but like culturally, when somebody rich would invite you to their wedding, they send out the wedding garments to everybody. And this person came, presumably dressed up, but not dressed in the wedding garment that was provided him by the king.
Okay.
And the king's like, "Why don't you have it on?" He doesn't have anything to say. He gets thrown out. And if you look in Revelation, the symbol of the wedding robe is the good works of the saints. It says, or the righteousnesses in Greek.
Yeah.
And he gives us that robe free of charge, and we're told multiple times in Scripture to put it on. And we're never told in Scripture. At least I don't want to make an absolute statement. I've never read in Scripture that God will take your filthy robes and scrub them clean, but that he will give you the new whitewashed robes of his righteousness. And so I don't know. It's this idea of putting on Christ's righteousness, letting him robe you in his righteousness instead of trying to scrub clean your own garments.
Yeah.
Or even letting him scrub them clean. He gives you new ones.
I heard one of my all-time favorite singers, Rich Mullins, he used to say, when we come to God, we think that we have to bring him the vices in our life, surrender that. He's like, not only do you have to surrender your vices, he's like, you have to surrender your virtue, because virtue, when paraded, is kind of the worst form of vice.
Yeah, there's a vice underneath that.
Yeah. So left to our own devices, we're doomed.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, just a little pun there. Yeah.
That's funny.
It's not funny if you have to explain it, though. That's what my wife says. So, okay, so you guys are starting to discover this reality that's like transforming even the way you think about journeying with Jesus. You're starting to, I think when we were talking yesterday a little bit, you were over at the house just telling us about, okay, we're feeling called to ministry. Do you have any advice? And I was like, well, I can give you a couple of cents, but we're just kind of discovering together. But some things were transpiring between what you were discovering about the gospel and then what you were experiencing that was like really starting to kind of maybe unravel what you thought was a ministry plan and beginning to kind of like maybe point towards a different kind of ministry plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of also around this time, it was linked to Miles's study of the sanctuary we ended up reading some Ellen White stuff, and she was kind of making the point of like, hey, if you're looking for God to talk to you and you're trying to kind of put out like these signs,
The fleece that Gideon talked,
yeah, like those kind of things, like that's not necessarily how you're going to get the best answer.
Okay.
And it was just kind of through a chance that we found this. And I don't know, do you remember the exact like wording of that?
Yeah, so there was she was rebuking this character in the early church. His name was Stonewall Jackson Harris.
Oh, wow. That's quite a name.
Yeah, and he was going around, and every time he was going to make a business deal, he just prayed to God, and he'd flip a coin, and then he'd do that.
Wow, that's an amazing story.
And he was trying to go.
I have to look into this. This is good.
So it's in this book called The Unwise Use of Mammon or something.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's a book about her experience with this guy.
Okay.
And so she goes to this guy, and he was reaching out to her saying, hey, this worked great for me. Let's have the church start doing this. We can get tons of money to do ministry. And she was just appalled.
We could have been the Seventh-day coin flippers.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And so she goes to him, and she's basically saying, hey, this is not in line with what the Bible teaches. Yes, people like, and she didn't say this exactly. This is the message we ended up getting. We read what she wrote, and then we went to the Bible to see if it was reflected in the Bible, and we found that everywhere that something happens, like that Gideon fleece moment, Gideon is showing an extreme lack of faith in that story. He asks for at least 3 signs from God, even though the angel shows up directly to him.
Another example of that would be like Zacharias and like John the Baptist's dad, he has an angel come to him, and instead of taking what he says, he's like, well, how do I know? And the angel's like, well, you just won't talk, for this amount of time. And so it seems like those times when you need that extra sign, even when an angel or God is directly talking to you, are unfortunate times.
Oh, like, yeah, okay.
And God will use them. God will use them if you don't have an understanding of him. But ultimately, he's trying to get you to move towards something that's more based on him speaking to you, and you hearing him through others or through your own thoughts or through something you said. And that to hear his voice, she was saying, if you can't hear his voice clearly, if you don't know what he's saying, then the solution is to study your Bible more, spend more time with him, because his voice, the most ready and easy place to find his voice is the scriptures. And so the more you study and read the scriptures and draw close to him, the more you'll recognize his voice, and you won't need things like these coin flips.
Now I'm reading a book by a theologian from Asbury called it's called Spirit Hermeneutics, Craig Keener, and he really makes this case. So if we think about how we engage with Scripture, sometimes you'll get in a Bible study and they'll say, "Well, what does the Bible say about Christ coming?" Okay, well, it says this over here and that over there and this back there, and obviously, depending on your faith heritage from a Christian perspective, some believe in a secret rapture, some believe that when Jesus comes, every eye will see him. So there's different perspectives, but we kind of all share this sense of we kind of systematically do a survey of Scripture to determine what does it say about a topic.
Right.
So that's sometimes referred to as systematic theology. And there's a deeper segment of that. And then there's kind of a more kind of like text by text segment of that. So, and then you have a type of theology called exegetical theology. That's like, okay, we're going to take a passage, say like the woman at the well. What was John intending to say? What was the cultural context? What was the historical context? And we kind of mine out what the intended meaning of the writer was. And then if we take that a step further, maybe we look a little bit into application. Keener makes this case for saying, we should retain systematic and exegetical theology, but then from a biblical standpoint, there's a texture of theology that he calls spirit hermeneutics, that is that the scriptures are dynamic, That the Spirit that inspired the word will then take stories or phrases or, parables or sometimes from the Psalms, and he'll take the word and then speak into the texture of our daily lives in such a way that while, maybe that wasn't the original exegetical intent of the writer, it is not
incorrect.
It's not out of line with the sentiments and overall systematic intent of Scripture. So that, it's like George Mueller, you can go to Bristol, England, and you see these two massive complexes that house, like 2,000 to 4,000 orphans. All of that stands there as a memorial to a passage that God led Mueller to in the Psalms that said, "Open your mouth and I will fill it." And he felt in his experience, he wasn't supposed to solicit donations. He was simply to ask God in prayer to provide. Eventually, years and years later, the stories would start to come out of, we asked God and he came through and whatnot. For Ingrid and I, when we came to Collegedale and I was going to be the worship pastor, and we were considering that calling 2 days before we got on the plane to fly from Colorado to Collegedale, God leads us to this verse from a story of Elisha in 2 Kings chapter 3, of Elisha asking for a musician. He says, "Bring me a musician." It says, when the Spirit of the Lord came upon...
Right. I remember.
Or when the musician played, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Elisha. And because of the timing of our journey and what we were considering, and then the fact that we were going through a Bible reading plan that, just had a daily assigned reading for the day, and the fact that that happened to be the daily reading 2 days before we were going to come here, that in conjunction with a whole host of circumstances just led us to believe.
Right.
God's like the Spirit of God is taking that passage. Or Jesus when he's tempted. Man does not live by bread alone. He's quoting a specific passage from Deuteronomy that was actually a summary of the experience of Israel in the wilderness with the manna. And yet, in principle, the concept of that passage applied to the very context in which Jesus was in with Lucifer in that moment when he was being tempted.
And I think you see that a lot in Matthew. Most of the quotes that Matthew has from the Old Testament, when you go to the context, it makes you scratch your head a little bit.
Yeah.
And he definitely...
Right.
The scriptures have a broader application than their immediate context, it seems.
Right. Yeah. The disciples in Acts chapter 4, when they're threatened, they pray Psalm 2 and say, God, we are living in the fulfillment of what this psalm is saying. Why do the nations conspire and rage and plot, blah, 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 blah. And we witness this with both the Romans and the Jews killing your holy servant Jesus. Now grant to us boldness based upon what Psalm 2 says.
Right.
Okay, so there's this dynamic experience of the word. And as you're feeling called out of like engineering into ministry, it sounds like maybe in some way you're having some kind of dynamic experience. What part was the word playing? What part was just circumstances of your life? What was going on?
Right. And it was really through that kind of realization, like we had felt stuff like that before when reading the Bible, but I think we were a little bit afraid to embrace it. And so even through God using that same method, again, we really decided to embrace that. And that same weekend that we had read that, he spoke.
Oh, okay.
He spoke multiple times.
What did you read that weekend? And then what did he speak?
It was this passage we found in that story we told you, and then
about the coin flip,
right?
Press deeper into the word,
right? And then going through the Bible and seeing that makes sense. When all of these people have done something similar to coin flipping, it's not a showing of faith.
Yeah. So rather than casting lots, which was maybe coin flipping in their day,
which was allowed. I mean, that was a sanctioned. The casting of lots with the Urim and Thummim was sanctioned. We don't have something sanctioned like that today.
Right. Yeah. He's like, well, you have a word now. Work with that. Okay.
So the first kind of start of this, I think, actually started with Miles, and like he was talking about with the entertainment.
we were visiting our friend in Ithaca.
Mm-hmm.
And I was headed back to my room for the night. I was staying in the men's residence. Sam was staying with her. And I heard a voice, and I was about to go to bed. I was taking out my headphones. I tend to listen to audiobooks before I go to bed, or I did. And it was a way that I could sort of escape from what was happening, engage in something else that was happening to somebody else that I wasn't attached to. I was about to put in these headphones, and I heard God's voice in my head. And he said, you've been feeling like you would like to do ministry. You've wanted that for a long time. If you're going to do ministry, are you willing to process life with me instead of trying to avoid processing life through media? Not saying that media is wrong for others. It was wrong for me because of my reasons and the way I was using it. And again, like I said before, this is something I'd struggled with my whole life. But when he asked, I was like, yeah, I can do that. I put the headphones away and I haven't taken them out since. Well, that's an exaggeration. I listen to sermons and things now, but I haven't used them for that purpose since. So that was the first thing. And that was the first of many interview questions we felt God asked us.
Wow. So before any conferences interviewed you or before
because nobody has
before a podcast even, God is like graciously saying, are you serious about this?
Yeah. The second, question in that interview, our friend was doing karate and she really wanted us to come and watch her class do board breaking. And as we were sitting there watching them, it was really cool. They were doing, 4 boards at a time. Some people were even doing some other crazy stuff.
Yeah, they were dropping a board, and while it was falling through the air, they would snap punch it, and it would snap in half in midair, which was cool.
But every time they were getting ready to break the board, they had to step back, and they had to practice fully going through the motion, as if they were already going through the board. And if they weren't committed enough, the teacher would be like, no, you have to follow through. And so every time they practiced following through, had the same form, the same discipline, and they stepped up, they succeeded. There wasn't a single person there who didn't break a board.
So this is like a living parable. You walk into the karate dojo or whatever they call it, whoa, they're standing on one leg, Karate Kid. And you're in this living parable and you're hearing this, if you're not fully committed to following through.
Yeah, it was just this question that we both kind of felt was are you going to be disciplined? Are you going to follow through? Are you focused enough to go into ministry? Is this something you're committed to fully?
Wow.
And Miles before, our answer to that was yes.
It's immediate, yes. Yeah, and that discipline, I think it really calibrated us for going into this journey. We're going into ministry, or we're hoping to, and God willing, we will. And we're going to need to have discipline in our life. The thing I think we realized is that ministry isn't going to just be a career shift. It's an entire lifestyle commitment. Every portion of our lives has to be committed to this calling.
Well, I think it's really significant that God kind of allowed you to realize that sanctifying thing. If you're going to have the discipline, it's got to be good because he's giving it to you.
Right.
It's not
take it seriously, but we're not going to be able to do this by our own power. And we felt that process he had started in us, we finally realized exactly why he's preparing us for this.
So the preparation in a way for ministry was a kind of a full-on realization of the power of grace is not just for our past, but it's for our present and future.
Right.
And so whatever discipline it's going to take is going to be the fruit of grace and mercy and the love of God empowering you as the children of God to live out whatever he's calling you to.
That's right. Yeah, so the third thing that happened, we were going to a church with our friend, and both of us felt God ask us, hey, you guys are engineers. You are socially awkward. You've been trained for 4 years not to engage with others. To some degree, we've noticed that I came in as an extrovert to engineering and walked out rather introverted and having a hard time interacting with others.
Oh, wow.
So I think engineering may have that built in a little. But he asked us, are you willing to start reaching out to people you don't know and be social?
So geekiness is baked in.
Yeah, I mean, to some degree. Yeah. And whether or not you're interested in normal things, I don't know, like, I don't even know what's normal. Cars comes to mind.
Yeah.
Or whether you're interested in gaming. Like, either way, when you walk out of engineering, you have a harder time looking people in the eye. We had a friend visit from outside of engineering. She was visiting one of our events, and she said she walked in there and not a single person looked her in the eye. You know?
Okay. And so now God is challenging you. Hey, the geekiness, probably for reasons we have yet to discover, is baked in. But now that that's baked in, we're gonna put some frosting of engagement and connection and interest in others on this unique kind of ministry cake.
And we said yes again. It was interesting. He'd ask us the question, things we'd struggled with for a long time. We'd just be like, yes. And we went and we engaged. We made some connections. But the biggest, most clear call for us happened more directly to Sam than it did to me. So I want to let her talk about it.
Yeah. We were, this is kind of wrapping up the weekend. We were with our friend at lunch. And we're kind of talking to her about this, and we're like, we're trying to figure out what we kind of want to do with our next steps. We have engineering, which we can stay in. Miles loves his career. I'm not so thrilled, but like we can work with it. We could maybe go do this real estate thing with Miles's family, and that would be, a good way to have financial stability, pay for kids' college one day. Or like, we've always loved ministry, but like we're just not really sure, what that would look like, or if we're being called to that. And she herself is a Christian. She is also in ministry, and that's why we're kind of wanting to, pray with her and talk with her about it.
And we met her at Rio too.
Yeah, she's also from Rio.
Which is sort of that divine providence that brought us all together. Because she was part of this call.
Getting real because of Rio.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so she kind of squared with me, and she was like, in your current job, you're going to get the least amount of spiritual benefit from it just because of the environment that you're in. She was like, I can't necessarily speak to the real estate thing, but she turned to like look at me, but it wasn't just her, like God looked at me, and it was so intense. And I couldn't meet his eye, and
like you're kind of wanting to look away.
Yeah. Like, and I was like, it was so intense. I was like trying not to cry. I was like, oh my gosh.
I felt it too. I felt him look at her. I felt something big happening. I got a little scared because I didn't know what was going on, but
it was, and we say scared, but it was
fear.
Yeah, like the biblical kind of fear, like it was good.
Oh, this isn't happening. Yes, it is happening.
Yeah, and
he's not a tame lion.
And so our friend kind of asked me, like, are you ready to be in ministry? And at first I was like, oh, I don't know. But as she kind of went on about, like it's about listening to people, it's about helping them through their problems, it's about sharing God. It was a lot of the stuff that we've done, a lot of the stuff that we wanted to do. And like all of these other questions, like I think we both kind of sat there and were like, yeah, we want to do this.
That's interesting because those 3 yeses to those 3 questions, they were really the capstone of a whole bunch of yeses all the way back to when you guys met at Rio Linda. So you may think when God comes calling your name for something big, but he's actually been leading you step by step all the way up to that kind of decisive moment.
And in fact, even when God calls Abraham, he calls him to go to Canaan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you go back a couple verses, they were already moving to Canaan. They just, didn't quite get there, stopped in Haran.
Yeah, wow.
And then God calls Abraham to go, or Abram at the time. So it's not like he was calling Abram to do something that was completely foreign.
We're going to get you the rest of the way.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really interesting. So this is probably a good place to do a wrap. So out of this conversation, what's the big takeaway for you guys today?
Big takeaway. Well, I think there's a couple.
Mm-hmm.
The first big takeaway is that for us to become transformed and truly become holy and righteous followers of Christ, we have to let him change us. We have to pursue a relationship with him.
Mm.
That's vital because it leads us not to trying to improve ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads us to constantly spending time with him every day.
Mm.
That's first takeaway. Second takeaway, I think
God takes his time.
Mm.
I know definitely for me, I was praying for a long time to get that purpose and that calling.
Mm-hmm.
And to think if I had really, committed to falling out of faith,
Mm-hmm.
who knows what would have happened. And it was only, a year and a half-ish wait past that time of really like trying to work with God. So I think, just being super patient, that it can take a while, but it's good and it's worth the wait.
Mm. Yeah, well, that's great. We want to thank you for joining us at Intersect. And if I could just summarize in my own words what I heard Miles and Sam say. First of all, from Miles, seek his face above all else. And then from Sam, seize the day, knowing that God takes his time and that what you're experiencing right now, while you may not understand it, is creating the opportunity for what's next. Go in his grace and seek to intersect with him and the people in your path.